Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. If you follow Age of Empires 2 patches and updates, you probably noticed the most recent July patch is getting pretty experimental with animals. Not in the sense that PETA is going to start protesting. We're not talking about that kind of animal experimentation. But in the most recent update, we saw not just brand new animal types, but even existing ones like bears, Komodo dragons, and wolves are getting variants and wacky new special abilities. In this video, I'll summarize the important differences to know between the various types of animals, as well as some beginner and more advanced tips. To think about how far things have come, at this point there are a little over or under 70 animals in the game, depending on how you group them. Whether a horse and a wild horse are the same animal is a debate we'll leave to the philosophers, but either way it's a lot, and we're going to need a bigger boat or 7 to 8 transport ships if we want a sufficient arc replacement these days. But speaking of boats, let's start our animal tour by looking at the fish variations. First off, there are 3 types, with the most important being the deep sea fish. Of these, there are actually 7 subtypes, one of which is dolphins, which isn't technically a fish, but close enough. These are all completely identical in collection rate, but vary in how much food they hold. Notably, dolphins and marlins have over 50% more food, and as an interesting quirk, perch have a bit less food than the others. If you don't know, perch in reality are a bit of a smaller fish, especially besides some of the others in the game like tuna, so maybe it's a subtle reference to that. This is all in contrast to the shorefish and box turtles, which are just identical reskins. An important gameplay tip to know is that fishing ships collect from shorefish at only a little better than half the rate they do from deep sea fish, so even if shorefish are very close to a dock, they're often not the thing to prioritize. Instead, villagers collect incredibly quickly from shorefish, and is something used on Nomad quite a bit for instance. A recent addition to water is then oysters, which provide gold instead of food, and can be gathered by either fishing ships or villagers at about the rate of a regular gold miner. And in this case, both the villager and fishing ship can then drop that gold off at a dock. Strangely, gillnets and the Japanese fishing ship bonus work on oysters, as one of, if not the fastest gold generation source in the late game at almost 35 gold per minute. So those are the water-based animals in AoE2, and now let's look to the skies. The birds in the game are basically just eye candy, though situationally they can extend the sight of animals like Boar to chase units that would otherwise fall out of their line of sight. There are technically 7 types of birds, with seagulls as a unique case that only generate around docks. There's also Stormy Dog as a cheat code unit, which heartwarmingly refers to a dog rescued from a storm drain by AoE dev Matt Pritchard during the game's development. The different variations of birds are all the same in line of sight and speed, and unlike AoE 1, they can't be targeted by hunters, though if you could, it would be exciting, as all AoE 2 birds share an interesting property of exploding when they're destroyed, such as with a trigger. I have no idea why the developers added that, since you can't destroy birds by any usual means, but it's ended up being an incredibly useful tool for scenario creators. Anytime you see an explosion, you can bet there was probably a bird preceding it. But now let's move on and talk about these scout units. Usually, of course, you start with a scout cavalry, or sometimes camel or eagle scout, but there are other trained animals that will sometimes take on that role. The most common is the Hunnic horse for Huns on Nomad starts, but on Mega Random for instance, any civilization can get one of a few scouting animal replacements. These are basically interchangeable and have the same speed and line of sight as a regular scout, including the 30% improvement in speed when you hit feudal age, as well as the ability to auto-scout. The outlier is the Hunnic horse, which presumably for balance reasons is a little extra slow, both in dark and feudal age. That said, it's still a free unit, so Hun players probably shouldn't look the gift horse in the mouth, and none of these units of course give any food or can attack, while are all faster than their wild counterparts. Speaking of which though, let's talk about the passive wild animals. These are low HP, slow moving reskins of each other, which roughly follow each map's theme. A lot of map generations in the July patch seem to include monkeys, but you'll get camels on African theme maps and penguins on the real world map Antarctica for example. All 5 of these animals have the same behavior of running away when approached, and can't be hunted for food. Sometimes you can catch them running in the fog of war, which can alert you to units passing nearby, but that's about all they're good for. The more extreme case of animal eye candy though is of course panda rocks, which you can't even interact with, and exist solely to look cute, much like pandas in real life. Now though, let's talk about animals with more gameplay impact, starting with the Herdables. There used to be quite a few differences between these, in terms of line of sight especially, but at this point everything from sheep to llamas are identical in food, speed, line of sight, and HP. There's still an important distinction though with the large herdables, including cows and water buffaloes, with 150 food instead of 100. Now, you might think when a map spawns the larger animals, you just get proportionally fewer of them, and everything ends up the same. But that's not fully the case. On Arabia, for instance, when you spawn one of the varieties of sheep, you get your starting 4 plus 2 more groups of 2, for a total of 800 food and herdables. With a cow or water buffalo start though, typically you have an initial group of 3, with then still 2 groups of 2 defined, so you actually have about 30% more food available. Other maps will play around with this though, like Lombardia for example, giving you the standard 4 plus 2 groups of 2 cows, so you just have 50% more food than your typical start, helping you delay farms quite a bit longer. There are also implications for scouting here, with the larger animals having 3 line of sight compared to the sheep's 2. Offsetting that, the larger animals do move a bit slower, and typically you have 1 fewer to start with on maps that give either option, so sheep scouting gets out to a faster start. But in total, there's usually an overall advantage with larger animals. What all of these herdables have in common is a slower collection rate than hunted animals, but they also decay at half the rate of a boar to help minimize the impact of that. Still, you want to use several villagers on them if you can, and take from just 1 at a time in order to get the maximum food out of them, which is about 90% of the food they offer when you use 6 villagers. Recently, there's been a new addition to the herdable family though, with herdable chickens. These show up on Nomad and hold just 65 food, while having an even smaller line of sight than sheep. But whereas herdables on Nomad maps tend to spawn as single units, chickens always spawn in pairs. As a pair, they actually have more food and more scouting ability than a single sheep, and are actually a net small improvement over those all around. So those are the herdables, and now let's talk about the huntable animals, starting with deer. This is one grouping that's become much more varied just in the last few months, with now 2 types. The classic deer includes 5 animals, from ibex to ostrich, holding 140 food, are collected from faster by villagers than sheep, and can be pushed by scouts. Arabia will generate a group of 2 to 4, relatively far from the town center, as well as other smaller groups around the map. On the other hand, Arabia has a 50% chance to instead give you wild chickens, or the new hare, which are unpushable and individually hold roughly half as much food. They still collect at the faster hunted animal gather rate, decay at half the speed of deer, and also generate closer to the town center. Whether to walk out and get them or build a mill depends a bit on your preference and the number of chickens and hares, but they spawn with anywhere from 6 to 8 in their group, giving similar food to 3 or 4 deer. Generally, deer spawns are considered more aggressive, as pushing deer with a scout is truly the most optimal food source in the early game from a villager perspective. At one point, taking deer was widely considered optional, at least for players under 1200 elo, though today even players at 900 elo are largely making use of deer and chickens, so it's not something you want to overlook anymore. The other type of huntable animal are boar, and just like deer, come in 2 varieties. The wild boar, sometimes renamed javelina on certain maps like Yucatan, and the elephant and rhino, which holds 60 extra food. Luring these with a villager is pretty much an essential skill, though is helped out a lot now by town centers being able to shoot them and not lose the animal's food as of the July patch. Beyond the obvious, there are a few lesser known things to point out here. First off, they have significant bonus damage, with not just 7 melee attack, but 4 extra against eagles, plus 3 against cavalry, and plus 8 against camels. This is what makes them so hard hitting against scouts, and is definitely something to watch out for, especially with a hill disadvantage. Note that the rhino and elephant's higher food total also comes with some extra danger, as those units take a bit less time to do their attack cycle, meaning you end up taking hits more quickly and can't safely lead them quite as far. If you're paying attention, it's still very possible to lure elephants and rhinos without loom, but just be aware of that extra bit of danger. Combining all the variability in herdables between cows or sheep, the number of deer or chickens that can spawn, as well as whether you get boar or an elephant and rhino combo, there's actually a lot of variability in Dark Age food available. For example, with a modest 2 boar and 8 sheep, plus an unfortunate 2 deer spawn, that's just 1,760 food on the map. Whereas on the other extreme, you could get 7 cows, 4 deer, and an elephant and rhino, giving you an extra 650 or 37% more food in total, which is obviously an intentional choice by the devs to incentivize adaptation or using these same build orders over and over. But especially for civilizations like Mongols, Britons, or Tatars, the advantage of their bonuses genuinely varies between map generations. Of course, we still have to talk about the main inspirations for this whole video, which are a brand new unit type, as well as the new predator variations and special abilities. To quickly touch on the new foxes, I've noticed these in the July patch on Arena in particular, and unlike all other land animals, give you gold instead of food. It's like I've always said, foxes truly are the oysters of the land, just don't think about it too hard. These are actually very convenient to gather from, with a villager collection rate about 3 times that of a gold miner, and also goes instantly into your stockpile. Next though, let's talk about the predators. Right off the bat, 5 of these are just simple reskins, with wolves now split into the gray, Arabian, and Arctic variety, which, just like penguins and camels, generate loosely tied to the map's seasonal theme. All of these have a massive line of sight of 12 tiles, but the distance they become aggressive toward villagers actually depends on the difficulty setting, going from a 4-tile radius on easiest to 6 tiles on any higher difficulty, except bears, which are 5 tiles. You may remember it used to jump up to a 12-tile search radius on moderate difficulty and up, and I don't know when exactly that changed, but is no longer the case, and combined with fewer wolves on maps in general, makes these less of a nuisance these days than they used to be, especially on Black Forest. If you do get too close to a wolf, their stats are identical to an unloomed villager, and are a bit faster than villagers when they run. So if you spot one coming and can't escape, the best thing you can do is target it before it attacks you. And these days, you seem to win that fight every time with 1 HP left. Again, wolves are clearly weakened a bit from the old days, where it was more of a coin flip, and I suspect at the moment a small delay has been added to the first attack of all wolves. If the animal gets a first hit on an unsuspecting and unloomed villager though, that villager is a goner, unless you can pull a somewhat advanced maneuver of forcing it away with a building foundation. A villager with loom though doesn't just have 15 more HP, but also takes 2 instead of 3 damage from wolves, so it can actually beat 2 predators in a row, albeit not at the same time. Of course, Magyars are the big exception, taking out predator animals in just 1 strike, as they have a built-in plus 100 attack bonus. Overall though, it's clear wolves have been somewhat defanged, which is half their original eyesight at higher difficulties, and losing one-on-one fights with unloomed villagers more consistently. Maybe just to throw wolves a bit of a bone, the devs have recently added some new variations that improve them in different ways. For instance, the snow leopard and jaguar now run faster than the typical wolf predator, though all of these already outrun villagers to begin with. More intimidating are bears, with 3 varieties all having different stats. The black bear is the least dangerous, as it is in reality, and just has the same stats but slower movement speed than a wolf, so that one's not really a concern. Brown bears though, which in reality includes grizzlies, add an extra 5 HP, bringing them to 30, and the polar bear has not just that same 30 HP, but also 1 extra attack. What that means is brown and polar bears always beat unloomed villagers, and even with loom will leave you with less HP, with polar bears in particular being a relatively close match 1-on-1. Perhaps even more dangerous are the dire wolf, crocodile, Komodo dragon, and rabid wolf. The dire wolf has double the usual HP and plus 1 attack, but I think it's just a scenario editor or campaign unit only. As for the other 3, crocodiles now have a plus 5 attack charge to start the fight, and Komodo dragon and rabid wolf both have a poison damage effect, with the rabid wolves being greater, but it also has 5 less HP, as it is a bit sickly and rabid after all. Without loom, villagers lose to all 4 of these variants, though even with loom, the dire and rabid wolves technically win, with the rabid wolf defeating the villager through disease after the fight. The crocodile and Komodo dragon are the more likely ones you'll encounter, and a loom villager still wins 1-on-1, so this is all maybe less impactful in practice than it sounds. Now just for the sake of completion, I'll also mention the other cheat code and scenario only animals, including the donkey, which acts like a trade cart, Sharkhatsaur, Alfred the alpaca, the war penguin, iron boar, and Furious the monkey boy. Of these, 2 stand out. First off, the iron boar can now be hunted by villagers, whereas previously they couldn't target the unit. It's actually a great food source in Mission 1 of the Attila campaign now, considering boar killed by military units no longer lose all their food immediately. Keep in mind the iron boar has decent melee armor, so villagers are probably not the way to deal with them at all, and Attila with his plus 40 anti-boar bonus damage is definitely the better choice. In fact, I feel like the game not letting you target it before with villagers was mostly just to save you from the disaster that would ensue. The other most notable unit here is Furious the monkey boy, who I think is slightly misunderstood. He has just 9 HP, so he's pretty terrible at fighting units despite his 99 attack. What Furious is actually insanely good at is destroying buildings, as he has plus 999 bonus damage against those. He is a great unit, but just has to be used in the right way. So that concludes our tour of the full AoE zoo. Big thanks to James, Jared2142, General Anesthesia, Niels, Samantha, Shawarma Rider, Siddhant Shah, Tanmay Shrivastava, Woodruff, and everyone else on Patreon for their amazing support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.